Michael Biehn tells the truth about Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday. For decades, there's been a story about Tombstone that never quite went away. That Michael Biehn and Val Kilmer barely tolerated each other. That the tension between Johnny Ringo and Doc Holliday came from two actors who simply didn't like one another. But when Biehn was asked about it, his answer surprised me. Because according to him, there was no secret feud. There was something much more interesting going on. The scene everyone remembers wasn't built on friendship. It was built on respect. And that becomes obvious when you look at what happened just before those two men faced each other beneath that famous oak tree. Biehn wanted to play Doc Holliday when he first came in for Tombstone. He didn't get the part. Val Kilmer did. So Biehn looked at the other major role and immediately knew what he wanted. Johnny Ringo. And honestly, it was probably the perfect role for him. Ringo wasn't just another Western villain. He was educated, dangerous, unpredictable, and almost strangely calm about the violence around him. Biehn understood the character. But Tombstone itself was anything but calm. The production was already in trouble when the original writer-director Kevin Jarre was removed only weeks into filming. George P. Cosmatos came in to finish the movie, and large sections of the story were changed. Characters disappeared. Subplots were cut. The production became a scramble to get the picture across the finish line. Biehn later compared it to a football team losing its coach in the middle of the season. Everybody just had to keep playing. And that chaos makes the relationship between Biehn and Kilmer even more interesting. Because people remember their characters as enemies. But Biehn says he and Kilmer didn't spend their time together acting like best friends between takes. In fact, he has said something even more striking. He has essentially described them as two people who never really got to know each other. No constant chatting. No hanging around together. No fake Hollywood friendship. They spoke through the characters. Ringo talked to Holliday. And Holliday answered. That's basically it. At first, that sounds cold. But then I thought about the scene. Maybe that's exactly why it worked. The night before the famous showdown, Biehn and Kilmer went to the location and rehearsed away from the rest of the crew. No big audience. No performance for everyone standing around. Just the two actors figuring out how the confrontation should feel. And they made one important decision. They didn't want the usual Western standoff. They weren't interested in standing far apart, waiting for the cameras to capture two men pretending to be dangerous. They moved closer. Much closer. That distance changed everything. Suddenly, the scene wasn't about who could draw faster. It was about two men studying each other. Waiting. Measuring. And realizing that neither one was backing down. That's the moment I think people misunderstand when they talk about Biehn and Kilmer supposedly hating each other. What looks like hostility on screen wasn't necessarily personal hostility behind the camera. It was concentration. Pure concentration. Biehn has called that confrontation one of the favorite scenes of his entire career. And there's a reason. Kilmer's Doc Holliday isn't playing the scene like a man who needs to prove something. He's almost amused by it. Biehn's Ringo sees someone standing in front of him who isn't afraid. And for just a second, you can see that realization hit him. That's the magic. Not the guns. Not the costumes. Not even the dialogue. It's the look. And that look only works if both actors trust each other enough to stay completely committed. What's funny is that Biehn's career had already taught him how important that kind of trust could be. Before Tombstone, he'd worked with James Cameron on The Terminator and Aliens. His relationship with Cameron wasn't built around everybody politely agreeing. Quite the opposite. Biehn has recalled Cameron criticizing one of his takes and telling him it was exactly what he didn't want. Biehn pushed back. Cameron pushed back. And somehow, that bluntness became part of their working relationship. Biehn respected directors who demanded something from him. He didn't need everybody to be his friend. He needed them to care about the work. And that seems to explain his experience with Kilmer too. There was no requirement for them to become buddies. They didn't need to spend lunch together. They didn't need to exchange stories between takes. They just needed to make the scene work. And they did. That becomes even more remarkable when you realize how complicated Biehn's own career had become by that point. He had already played Kyle Reese in The Terminator. He had become Hicks in Aliens. He had experienced major opportunities and painful disappointments. He missed out on roles that became iconic. He turned down the usual suspects because he couldn't make sense of the complicated script at the time. And then there was Alien 3, where Hicks was killed almost immediately. So Biehn knew what it meant for Hollywood to change direction without warning. He also knew that a great role could disappear before an actor had any control over it. That may be why Johnny Ringo mattered so much. It was a character he could really sink his teeth into. And he did. But there was another side to Biehn's story that makes his comments about Tombstone feel even more meaningful. His career wasn't always easy. He has spoken openly about years of heavy drinking and the damage it caused in his personal and professional life. Eventually, his health forced him to confront something much bigger. He suffered a serious stroke and suddenly couldn't read a script the way he once could. For an actor, that is terrifying. Memorizing lines had always been part of the job. Now it became a struggle. His memory took years to recover, and he stepped back from much of the work he had once taken for granted. But he kept rebuilding. Small role by small role. And he credits his wife, Jennifer Biehn, with helping him through that difficult period. That's the part of his story that changed how I see the Tombstone anecdote. Because when you've lived through that much professionally and personally, you probably stop caring about Hollywood gossip. You care about whether someone showed up. Whether they did the work. Whether you could trust them when the camera was rolling. And apparently, that's what Biehn remembers about Val Kilmer. Not a feud. Not some legendary backstage argument. Not two actors secretly trying to sabotage each other. Respect. Two actors who didn't need to be friends to create something unforgettable. And maybe that is why the Ringo-Holiday confrontation still feels different from so many movie showdowns. It doesn't feel manufactured. It feels like two people discovering, in real time, that they finally met someone worthy of the fight. Biehn's Ringo recognizes Kilmer's Holiday. And Holiday recognizes Ringo. For one scene, nothing else matters. Not the troubled production. Not the egos. Not Hollywood. Just the two men standing there. Waiting. And that's why I think Biehn's answer to the old rumor is so much better than the rumor itself. Sometimes chemistry doesn't come from friendship. Sometimes it comes from two people taking the work seriously enough to forget everything else. Michael Biehn and Val Kilmer may never have been close friends. But under that oak tree, they didn't need to be. They trusted each other. And somehow, that was enough to create one of the most memorable confrontations in Western movie history. 30 years later, people still remember the look. And maybe that's the real truth behind Johnny Ringo and Doc Holliday. They didn't need to like each other. They just needed to believe in the scene. And they did.